Have you ever felt like you're just stuck in a loop, maybe with your workout routine or even, the political options you see?
Hmm.
That feeling where you really want something different, something new, but you just end up cycling through the same old choices again and again.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, if that sounds familiar, you're going to want to stick around for this deep dive.
Absolutely.
Today, we're plunging into the really fascinating, sometimes pretty frustrating world of Malaysian politics, specifically this idea of an elusive third force.
Right.
And the big question we're asking is Malaysia actually ready for a fresh political alternative? Or is it just sort of chasing a mirage that's always out there but never quite within reach?
That's exactly it. Our mission today is to uh, really unpack the viability. Is this third force actually feasible?
Oh, okay.
We'll be digging into the structural readiness, looking at the institutional constraints, the sociopolitical dynamics,
Oh,
drawing on some really insightful research here. And one of the core arguments we'll explore is this idea that Malaysia's third force seems perpetually trapped in what one paper calls electoral purgatory.
electoral purgatory. Wow.
Yeah, it means they're always promising transformation, but ultimately delivering parliamentary irrelevance. It's almost like they're stuck in permanent political adolescence.
Electoral purgatory. That's
Mhm.
a really vivid image.
Right.
Can you just quickly paint a picture? What does that parliamentary irrelevance actually look like? What stops them from, moving beyond just talk?
Well, it means they find it incredibly hard to win seats in parliament, even if there's public sympathy.
Okay.
Their ideas might get debated, might get some airtime, but they just don't have the numbers, the legislative muscle, to turn those ideas into actual laws or policies.
Ah, right.
They often end up looking more like protest movements,
Yeah.
maybe pressure groups, rather than parties people see as a serious governing alternative.
Yeah.
So translating that public feeling into real political power, that's the huge challenge.
Got it. That clears it up nicely. So by the end of this deep dive, you, the listener, should have a real shortcut to understanding the nuances here. Why this third force idea keeps popping up and the massive challenges it faces.
Exactly. Getting past the headlines.
Into the why. Right, let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Okay, so Malaysia's political story, for a long time, it's kind of resembled this dance between two main partners. They step on each other's toes sometimes, sure, but they rarely let anyone else onto the dance floor.
That's a good way to put it.
Since independence back in 1957, it's mostly been dominated by this sort of musical chairs system, the same familiar faces, the same group, just shuffling between being in government and being in opposition. Predictable almost.
And right now, that dance involves two major players. You've got the unity government that's a coalition primarily between Pakatan Harapan, or PH, and Barisan Nasional, BN.
Okay.
And then you have the opposition, Perikatan Nasional, or PN.
Can you give us a quick sketch of who's who there, ideologically?
Sure. So very broadly, PH is generally seen as the more reformist, multi-ethnic bloc.
Hmm.
BN historically was the dominant force for decades, more Malay-centric. And PN is a more recent conservative Malay-Muslim alliance.
Right.
And while these two big coalitions represent, significant chunks of the population, there's a feeling among many observers and the public that this constant back and forth actually harms the political landscape. It fuels this desire for something else.
So it's not just about swapping leaders within the same old structures. It's a deeper yearning for something fundamentally different, isn't it?
Exactly.
What were the moments, the key historical shifts, that really turned up the volume on this desire for a third force?
Well, the absolute game changer was the 2018 general election. No question.
Watershed moment.
Absolutely monumental. It was the first time since independence that the federal government changed hands. It broke decades of dominance by one coalition, BN. Huge psychological shift.
Right, but then things got complicated again, didn't they?
Oh, very quickly. Just 2 years later, in 2020, we had the Sheraton move.
Yes.
A major political maneuver. Basically, the ruling PH coalition collapsed midterm due to defections. It led to a new, unelected government taking power and really fragmented the political landscape even further.
And that must have just poured fuel on the fire of disillusionment.
Completely. That rapid shift, the instability, the sense of promise is broken.
Oh.
It really cranked up voter disillusionment and cynicism. People started questioning the whole system.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's interesting, Malaysia's political system itself often gets described with these slightly academic terms like semi-democracy or repressive responsive regime. What do those actually mean on the ground? How do they affect new movements?
That's a good question. These terms basically point to its hybrid nature.
Hybrid.
Yeah, meaning Malaysia has democratic features, regular elections, a relatively free press, active civil society, but it also keeps certain authoritarian controls.
Like what?
Things like restrictions on assembly or speech, sometimes using security laws to manage dissent. It creates this kind of gray zone. So for new movements, it's a unique challenge. There's enough freedom to organize and speak out, to exist. But there are real limits on their ability to gain actual power or fundamentally challenge the established order.
Interesting. So there's space, but it's constrained space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we've even seen how prominent reformist figures like Anwar Ibrahim, once seen as this beacon for a new Malaysia, championing transparency, social justice, anti-corruption. Even leaders like him, once they get into power, find themselves constrained by the very system they aim to transform. It's tough.
So this political heartburn, as you called it, seems pretty chronic. But thinking about the nature of this yearning for a third force, is it a clear, unified vision for something new? Or is it more like, as one source put it, just a fragmented, desperate plea?
I think it leans much more towards the fragmented, desperate plea. A plea for something better, whatever that might look like.
Right.
The disillusionment runs deep. It comes from the constant political maneuvering, the endless focus on the 3 Rs. That's race, religion, and royalty. Though mostly how race and religion get used as political tools.
Ah, the identity politics.
Precisely. And of course, the lingering smell of corruption. Plus, people are genuinely frustrated about the cost of living, the political instability, this feeling that things just aren't moving forward.
Is there a recent example that really highlights this? How identity politics can kind of hijack things?
Yeah, actually, the Allah socks controversy back in March 2024. It blew up over socks printed with the word Allah being sold in some store.
I remember that.
It became a huge national issue, fueled outrage, boycotts. It really showed how quickly identity-based populism can flare up and completely derail any focus on substantive reforms to economic issues. Just pulls all the oxygen out of the room.
Yeah, that makes sense. And against that backdrop, we see these specific third force movements trying to emerge. Let's talk about a couple. There's MUDA, the Malaysian United Democratic Alliance. What's their story?
MUDA is quite interesting. It's very youth-focused. Officially launched in September 2020, led by the former Youth and Sports Minister, Syed Siddiq.
Okay.
Their platform is built around good governance, transparency, fighting corruption, environmental sustainability. Basically, issues that resonate strongly with younger Malaysians. They're trying to represent a new generation looking for a different kind of politics.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, maybe, is PSM, the Malaysian Socialist Party. Sounds quite different.
Very different. PSM is really the only established left-wing political party of its kind in Malaysia. And they have a long history, real roots.
What kind of work do they do?
They focus heavily on the marginalized, plantation workers, the urban poor, indigenous communities, the Orang Asli. They have a solid track record, too, actually winning tangible victories, like securing housing for workers, pushing for minimum wage laws. Very grassroots, very activist-driven.
Okay, 2 quite distinct approaches, then.
Definitely. And this is worth remembering. A survey back in 2019 suggested about 17% of Malaysians were already open to backing a third force.
And that number's likely higher now.
You'd have to assume so, given how the shine, has kind of worn off the established parties since then.
Yeah.
These third force movements, MUDA, PSM, others, they're really trying to move beyond the old race-based politics and champion issues that often get ignored.
Right. So we've established there's this real desire, this disillusionment fueling the call for change. But despite that, why is the path for a third force so incredibly difficult? You described it as less a highway, more an obstacle course designed by a mischievous deity.
Yes, that feels about right. The challenges are huge, really formidable.
Like what? What's the first big hurdle?
The electoral system itself, the structure. Malaysia uses a first-past-the-post system, FPTP, like the UK or the US.
Okay. And why is that bad for smaller parties?
Because it inherently disadvantages them. To win a seat, you need the most votes in that specific constituency. Plurality, not majority often. So it massively incentivizes smaller parties to join big coalitions just to have a chance. Otherwise, their votes are seen as wasted.
Ah, the wasted vote syndrome.
Exactly. Plus, FPTP systems are prone to issues like malapportionment, where votes in rural areas might count more than urban ones, and gerrymandering.
Drawing the boundaries to favor certain parties.
Precisely. So the system itself stacks the deck against newcomers before a single vote is even cast.
It's easy to talk about these systemic biases in theory, but can you give us a really concrete example? How does FPTP play out in harsh reality for a new party like MUDA? What happened to them?
Oh, MUDA's experience in recent state elections is a brutal case study.
How so?
They fielded 19 candidates. All 19 lost their deposits.
Wow, lost their deposits. What does that mean exactly?
It means they failed to get even 12.5%, just 1/8 of the votes in their constituencies. It's a threshold to show you have some level of serious support. Losing all of them, that's a devastating result.
Ouch.
Yeah. It was so bad it led some commentators to ask, a bit harshly perhaps, if they'd confused politics with performance art. It really felt like, bringing a keris, that traditional Malay dagger, to a tank fight. Mobile effort, maybe, but just painfully outgunned in that electoral arena.
Okay, so the system's a killer. But beyond that, you mentioned a credibility conundrum new parties face. What's that about? Why are voters hesitant?
Right, the credibility issue. New parties, new faces. They inevitably face skepticism, especially if their leaders are defectors from the established parties.
People wonder about their motives.
Exactly. Is this genuine ideological commitment, or is it just, personal ambition? Being new is a double-edged sword. It signals change, which is good, but it also signals inexperience, a lack of track record.
Then voters worry about wasting their vote.
Precisely. Especially when the stakes feel high, they tend to stick with the familiar players, the ones who seem like they could actually form a government, even if they're not thrilled with them.
Makes sense. And then there's the sheer resource gap, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely massive. Think about it. Parties like those in BN and PH, they have decades of history, deep pockets, established machinery, often favorable media access, entrenched networks right down to the village level.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, parties like PSM and MUDA are, as one source vividly put it, scraping by on grassroots grit.
That says it all.
And compounding this, Malaysia still lacks comprehensive laws on political financing. So it's not a level playing field when it comes to funding campaigns or running party operations. Money talks, unfortunately.
So system bias, credibility issues, resource gaps.
Yeah.
What else? Is there a challenge in just defining what they stand for?
Yes, definitely. The policy differentiation challenge.
Okay.
Established parties, for better or worse, have pretty clear ideological brands, often rooted in those deep ethnic and religious cleavages we talked about. They've dominated the political discourse for so long. For third force parties, carving out a truly distinct and appealing policy platform can be tough. Take MUDA focusing on youth, environment, anti-corruption.
Yeah.
Important issues, yes, but is it broad enough to build a winning coalition?
And anti-corruption. Everyone claims that, right?
Exactly. It's almost table stakes. It's hard to be unique just on that. So they struggle to articulate a clear, compelling alternative vision that cuts across existing loyalties.
Okay, so putting all this together, what's the outlook? What does this mean for the future of Malaysia's third force? Sounds like a real paradox. The country seems structurally ready, maybe even eager for change, but the system itself just keeps shutting the door. This institutional trap, as it's been called.
It really is a trap. And the sources we looked at sketch out basically 3 potential scenarios moving forward.
Okay, what are they?
Scenario 1, electoral breakthrough. This is the dream scenario, right?
Yeah.
The optimistic one. It would require a perfect storm. Massive voter dissatisfaction with both major coalitions, probably a really charismatic, unifying leader for the third force, and maybe some serious electoral reform.
Possible.
Possible, but
Yeah.
the probability seems pretty low right now, given those structural barriers we discussed and voters' ingrained reluctance to waste their vote.
Okay, so breakthrough is unlikely. What's scenario 2?
Scenario 2 is coalition integration. This seems more likely.
Meaning
the third force parties don't win on their own, but they gain influence by joining one of the existing major coalitions. We've seen this happen before, like MUDA's previous, albeit brief, collaboration with Pakatan Harapan.
Right, so that gives them a path to some viability.
It offers electoral viability, yes, a chance to win seats, maybe even get into government. But the big question then becomes, can they maintain their independence, their reformist ideals? Or do they just get swallowed up, co-opted by the bigger players, and lose what made them different?
The classic dilemma. Okay, in the third scenario.
The third, and arguably the most probable scenario currently, is perpetual opposition.
Sounds frustrating.
It is. In this scenario, the third force remains politically relevant. They contribute to public debate, they raise important issues, but they stay electorally marginal. They don't win many seats.
So they act more like pressure groups.
Exactly, like pressure groups with parliamentary ambitions, as one paper put it. They can push the established parties, maybe influence policy indirectly, hold them accountable, but they don't achieve direct power themselves. They stay on the sidelines.
So are they doomed to one of these traps, or are there ways out? One source mentioned learning from parties abroad, like the UK Labour Party rising from minor status by focusing on a clear agenda. Could Malaysian third forces do something similar? What strategic shifts could they make?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? And yes, there are potential adjustments. One key area is issue focus.
How so?
Instead of trying to be everything to everyone, maybe concentrate intensely on specific areas where the big parties are genuinely weak or failing. The cost of living crisis is a huge one. Genuine electoral reform. Maybe tackling the legacy of the new economic policy, the NEP.
The affirmative action policy?
Right. Pushing for more needs-based policies instead of race-based ones could potentially bridge some ethnic divides. Find those policy gaps.
Okay, sharp issue focus. What else?
Coalition building, but maybe broader than just electoral pacts.
Broader how?
Building real alliances with civil society groups, professional bodies, single-issue movements. Also, crucially, looking beyond the peninsula. Building bridges with parties in East Malaysia, like Warisan or GPS in Sarawak, to create a truly national, diverse alternative.
Interesting. A more bottom-up coalition.
Yeah. And related to that, maybe a local focus.
Yeah.
Start smaller. Concentrate on winning local council seats in state elections. Build a track record of governing effectively at that level first.
Yeah.
Gain voter trust before aiming for federal power.
Build credibility from the ground up. Makes sense.
Two more quick ones. Authentic leadership. Finding and promoting leaders who aren't seen as just refugees from the old parties. Fresh faces.
Yeah.
Genuinely new perspectives.
Harder than it sounds, probably.
Oh, definitely. And finally, grassroots organizing. Really doubling down on building a dedicated activist base, like PSM has done with its Gabungan Marhaen Front, using things like the traditional Sarama or mass rallies effectively to build excitement and connect directly with voters, trying to recapture some of that energy from the old Reformasi days.
Right. Okay, so there are potential strategies.
So, yeah, wrapping this deep dive up, the reality is complex, isn't it? Malaysia seems both ready and, well, not ready for a truly viable third force.
How so? Ready and not ready?
Well, the political culture shows this openness, this desire for new ideas, alternative voices. You see it in the discourse. That's the ready part. It's admirable. But the system, the electoral rules, the institutional hurdles, systematically keeps these alternatives away from real power. That's the not ready part. As one paper summed it up, they often end up being loud, idealistic, and chronically unable to win over the adults in the room. Still, you have to admire their energy.
And what this really means for you, listening, is that the future path for Malaysia's third force might actually depend less on their strategies, brilliant as they might be, and more on how well the established parties perform. If the current government and the main opposition continue to disappoint voters, if they fail to address those core frustrations, well, then the conditions for a third force breakthrough might finally emerge.
Exactly. Their fate isn't entirely in their own hands.
And maybe, here's a final thought to chew on. Maybe the true value of Malaysia's third force right now isn't actually about being a potential government in waiting at all.
What is it then?
Perhaps it's about being a democratic irritant in a good way.
A democratic irritant. Yeah. A constructive critic? A source of policy innovation? A watchdog keeping the big players honest? You know, in a country where political promises, let's be frank, are sometimes broken with the regularity of monsoon rains, maybe just being that persistent voice, making that modest contribution to democratic discourse, as one writer put it. Maybe that's achievement enough for now.
So maybe not a governing alternative yet.
Maybe too far off for that right now. But perhaps close enough, visible enough, to serve as a democratic necessity. A constant reminder that other solutions, other ways, might still be possible.